Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Children destined for the throne. History has recorded countless children born into luxury, under the radiant light of royal power, raised to become great. They were the embodiment of bloodlines, politics, and national expectations. But sadly, that light was not always enough to guide them. Sometimes it was that very light that burned them. There were children who grew up within gilded walls, yet never learned compassion. Princes worshipped like deities, but inside, they were shattered souls, isolated and wounded. When power comes too early and too easily, it doesn't awaken character, it distorts it. From potential greatness, they became the most terrifying creation of power, a corrupted being who no longer recognized how far they had strayed. Look at Caligula, John the Seventh, and Ivan the Terrible, three of the clearest examples of that tragedy. Caligula, the emperor with sparkling eyes and a rotten mind. His real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. Born into a beloved family, son of the legendary Roman general Germanicus, Caligula was adored as a symbol of the future. Soldiers called him Caligula, little boots, because he wore tiny military sandals when following his father into battle. Yet only a few years after ascending the throne, the child once cherished by the legion became the living nightmare of the empire. Caligula turned the palace into a stage for orgies, executions, and physical torment. He declared himself a god and demanded worship as a living deity. Some Roman historians wrote that he raped his sister, killed for amusement, and appointed his horse as a senator. But Caligula wasn't mad from the beginning. He was once a promising ruler. The Romans cheered when he rose to power. What turned a young heart into a monster? Perhaps it was the absolute loneliness of a child who lost his mother, was exiled, and then abruptly became the center of the universe where no one dared say no to him. Power didn't just drive him mad. It convinced him that madness was his divine right. John the Seventh, the teenage pope, and the price of indulgence. Not everyone who ascends a throne becomes an emperor. Some wear the crown of faith. And if Caligula stands as proof of political corruption, John the Twelfth is the embodiment of religious debauchery. Becoming pope at just 18, John the Twelfth was expected to guide the Catholic Church through a period of crisis. But instead of praying, he held sex feasts in the Lateran Palace. Instead of preaching virtue, he turned the holiest site of Christianity into a den of sin. It is said he blessed thieves, gambled during Mass, raped women inside the church, and was even suspected of selling priesthood appointments. How could someone like that become the head of faith? The answer? He was the son of a powerful noble, and the title of Pope came to him not as a spiritual calling, but as an inherited trophy. When a teenager, too young to grasp right from wrong, is handed the keys to heaven, the first thing he tries to unlock is hell. For Ivan the Terrible, when pain becomes the blade. No one understood the tragedy of power more than Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible. He was the first Tsar of Russia, and also the first to turn the throne into a place of bloodshed. Ivan lost his mother at the age of 8, abandoned in a palace full of nobles vying for power. From a forsaken child, he learned to survive through fear. And when power was finally in his hands, he repaid every wound he had received. Tenfold, he established the Oprichniki, a secret police force that executed without trial. He killed his own son in a fit of rage. He burned down the entire city of Novgorod out of mere suspicion of treason. Under his reign, Russia expanded, but its people's spirits shattered. What was most terrifying about Ivan wasn't just his brutality, it was brutality idealized. He believed he was chosen by God to purge the nation with blood. He believed his evil served a divine purpose. And that is when power becomes the most dangerous addiction, not because it grants strength, but because it gives people a reason to never feel remorse. Power does not turn people into monsters. It only removes the mask. One thing Caligula, John the Twelfth, and Ivan the Terrible had in common: they were all once wounded children. Caligula lost his family and was exiled. John the Seventh was a political tool of his father. Ivan grew up in violence, abandoned and despised. Power came to them not after they matured, but before they even had a stable sense of self. And so power didn't turn them into monsters. It merely flung open the doors for the monsters inside them to walk free. Corruption does not happen overnight. It happens when every cruel act goes unchecked, when every crossed line is forgiven, when only applause remains and no voices of warning are left. Lesson: the throne cannot save the soul. History is a mirror, but also a warning that no bloodline is good enough to guarantee greatness. That power, without limits, without compassion, without dissent, will corrupt anyone. Caligula was once beloved. John the XII once had the chance to make things right. Ivan was once seen as a liberator. But in the end, they all died in loneliness, contempt, or obscurity. Not because they weren't intelligent, but because they were no longer human. And perhaps that is the most frightening truth, that a person can lose themselves simply because they have everything. A tolling bell for the present. The stories of kings, emperors, and popes are not just tales of the past. In today's world, where social media can turn someone into a symbol overnight, where the powerful don't need battlefields but only numbers and a few strokes of a pen, corruption is still happening quietly. Anyone, whether a leader, a celebrity, or an ordinary individual, needs one thing to stay grounded: limits. No one should live unchallenged. No one should move forward without someone brave enough to say, "Stop," when morality does not accompany power. The history of humanity is a cycle of rise and fall, not only due to war, but often because of something seemingly intangible: morality. In the previous part, we saw individuals, such as Caligula, Ivan the Terrible, corrupted by power. But the most painful part of this tragedy is not merely the downfall of one person. It is when an entire nation, a religion, a system of belief places its fate in the hands of someone unworthy, and then that very faith is dragged into the abyss along with them. Two of the clearest examples are Pope John the XII and King John of England. One led the church, the other led the state, but what they shared was this: both failed at being decent human beings, long before they failed as leaders. Pope John VII, when the Holy See became a den of depravity. As the youngest pope in history, John VII was elevated to the throne at just 18 years old. He was a descendant of a Roman noble family, and his ascension came not from faith, but from political calculation. The problem was this: a man who had no regard for moral values became the spiritual leader of millions. What was the result? Records from the 10th century describe John VII's reign as the most disgraceful era in church history. He hosted drunken feasts and fornicated with prostitutes in the Lateran Palace, the most sacred center of Christendom. He was accused of murder, rape, and even blessing a robber in exchange for a share of the loot. It was said he played dice during Mass, that he prayed to the devil, that he tortured and blinded his political rivals within the papal residence. If Caligula declared himself a god, then John II defiled the very throne of the divine. But more seriously, he did not commit these acts in secret, but in public, in front of priests, cardinals, and even the common people. And when a pope loses his morality, the consequence is not just personal disgrace. It is the collapse of an entire generation's faith. When faith becomes a political tool. The reason John XII remained on the papal throne for so long was because he was loved, but because he existed within a system where morality was no longer a standard. The cardinals of that time were divided by family interests. European kings used the Pope as a tool to legitimize wars, granting absolution for killing. And the Vatican itself was no longer a spiritual center, but a battlefield of power where anyone who ascended the throne was considered strong, regardless of who they were. To John VII, ruling the church was no different from owning a kingdom. And like any tyrant, he destroyed his opponents, promoted the loyal, regardless of their competence or virtue. A position meant to heal the soul of humanity became the very place where the soul of its holder was strangled. King John. When a king made a whole nation want to rebel. From Pope John, we move to another man bearing the same name, but in the realm of secular politics. King John of England, 1166 to 1216, also known as John Lackland. He was the younger brother of Richard the Lionheart and ascended the throne amid widespread skepticism from the court. To the English people and nobility, John was the embodiment of a failed monarch, weak, unsuccessful in war, oppressive toward his subjects, and disrespectful toward the church. He heavily taxed peasants to make up for military losses in France. He took noblewomen and their children hostage. He abused judicial power to punish dissenters. Worst of all, he was excommunicated by the Pope for his violent interference in the appointment of the Archbishop. This was no longer personal failure, it was the total collapse of a state. Magna Carta, when a nation rose to demand morality, Staatsfreiheit, the dissatisfaction grew to a breaking point, compelling English nobles to do what had never been done before: force the king to sign a document that limited royal power. That document was the Magna Carta, the first charter in Western history to declare that even a king is not above the law. John did not sign it out of remorse. He signed it under pressure, and shortly after he violated the agreement, plunging the country into civil war and chaos. King John's story shows that when morality disappears from politics, the people, even the weakest among them, will find a way to restore justice by their own hands. Because no one can rule forever by threat alone, and no throne can stand on a foundation of contempt. The price paid not just collapse, but a stain on history. Both John XII and King John died in disgrace. One is remembered as the most depraved pope in history, the other as one of England's most incompetent and ruthless kings. But the true cost they left behind was not just personal infamy, it was the erosion of something far more sacred: the faithful's trust in the purity of the church, the public's trust in the fairness of royal authority, the belief that morality could walk hand in hand with power, and once those are broken, they cannot be quickly restored. You can rebuild castles, restore thrones, but you cannot resurrect a generation that has lost its faith, when morality is no longer a requirement, but just a slogan. Perhaps the saddest truth is this: morality, once the cornerstone of both religion and politics, is now often reduced to an empty slogan. Everyone speaks of it, few genuinely uphold it when choosing their leaders. Neither John VII nor King John lacked power. They lacked only one thing: a character worthy of that power. And because no one dared stop them early on, the tragedy didn't end with a single man, it spread across the entire society. A lesson for today: do not choose someone just because they are in the right place. Today, the world still grants power based on reputation, lineage, connections, or hollow promises. But the stories of John VII and King John remind us, when power is given to the unworthy, what is lost is not just trust, but the moral fabric of the whole. Religion needs those who are humble and pure. Politics needs those who understand that power is to serve, not to own. And if those qualities are no longer non-negotiable standards, then collapse is only a matter of time. Rulers from the outside may appear invincible. They command armies, their words become law, their fame echoes beyond national borders. But behind the fortress walls, behind the gilded thrones, are people silently breaking, not because of swords or spears, but because of the most human things: loss, betrayal, and a loneliness no one understands. No one embodied this more clearly than Ivan the Terrible, the Tsar who killed his own son in a fit of rage, and Richard the Lionheart, the legendary English king betrayed by his own brother while fighting in the Holy Land. Ivan the Terrible, a single blow that destroyed both blood and faith. Ivan IV of Russia, known in history as Ivan the Terrible, was the first to crown himself Tsar. He expanded the territory, reformed the court, and led Russia into a new era of unity. But at the same time, he spread terror with ruthless executions, torture, and purges. What few can forget, and what Ivan never forgave himself for, was one November evening in 1581. In a fit of rage, he struck his son, Tsarevich Ivan, in the head with a heavy iron staff, causing the young man to collapse, his blood staining the palace floor. A few days later, the son died, and the Tsar was never the same man again. No one but the two knew what truly happened in that moment. Only a famous painting remains, depicting Ivan cradling his son's body, wide-eyed and horrified, his hands stained with blood. That embrace, too late, that gaze met by no one. A death not by war, not by treason, but by the hand of a father. A man the whole of Russia bowed to as emperor. The beginning of an unnamed sorrow. How could a father kill his child? Was it because power drove him mad, or because loneliness had blurred the line between kinship and threat? Perhaps it was both. Ivan grew up motherless, surrounded by palace intrigue. His childhood had no parents, no love, only power and threats. In the heart of a child abandoned in a cold palace, toughness became the only armor for survival. But that armor, once transformed into a crown, suffocated even fatherly love. When Ivan struck his son, he wasn't striking a person. He was striking his own fear of betrayal, of losing control, of being overthrown. He reacted as a ruler, not a father, and the price he paid was something power could never restore: real loss. Richard the Lionheart, betrayed by his own blood. Across Europe in the same era stood Richard I of England, praised as Richard the Lionheart. He was the embodiment of courage, chivalry, and crusading spirit. But few know that while he fought in the Middle East, back home, his brother John conspired with enemies to usurp the throne. Richard was captured on his way back from war and imprisoned in the castle of a German prince. And during that time, John, the one who was supposed to protect the throne for him, tried to usurp it, declared himself king, broke alliances, and was even willing to concede to foreign powers just to seize authority. What Richard realized after being released was not only that loyalty could be bought, but that even blood could betray. The throne with no one truly standing beside it, Richard's pain did not lie in a lost battle, but in the feeling of being isolated within his own royal family. While all of Europe sang about the Lionheart back home, those who shared his blood were stabbing him in the back with political daggers. A king might defeat Saladin, conquer fortresses, and awaken faith in God, but he could still lose to his own brother in the silent war of greed and betrayal. Power could not protect Richard from being betrayed, and when he returned, though still a king, he knew there was no one left who truly stood by his side. Loneliness is not the absence of people, but the absence of trust. Tragedy lies not in blood, but in distance. Ivan killed his son. Richard was betrayed by his brother. Two stories, seemingly opposite, meet at one point. The distance between man and the throne. That distance is not measured in meters, but in trust, in love, in the ability to listen and to forgive. When a ruler forgets that he is also human, that he can love, can err, can apologize, he locks himself in a prison of his own making, where all emotions are choked by titles, where all loved ones become potential threats. The higher the glory, the deeper the loneliness. From John XII, King John, to Ivan and Richard, all reveal one truth. No one is lonelier than those at the top of power. Not because they lack respect, but because no one dares to speak the truth. No one close enough to call them father, brother, son, instead of your majesty, the king, holy father. And in that loneliness, mistakes are made, unseen, unchecked. A slap in anger can kill the future. A word left unsaid can shatter trust forever. Power makes one great, but emotion makes one human. We often think of leaders as hardened, unmoved by pain. But what Ivan and Richard went through shows, they too have limits. They too have moments of weakness. And in those moments, if no one is there to hold them, they will destroy what they love most. The fault does not lie solely with them. It lies also in the system around them, where one is taught to be a king before being taught to be human. Where victory is celebrated, but wounds are dismissed. And when wounds have nowhere to heal, they spread, turning into violence, betrayal, and the final drop of blood that stains the throne red. When the throne belongs not to reason, but to delusion. Not every ruler was as bloodthirsty as Ivan. Not all were betrayed like Richard. Some kings led their nations to ruin without wars or coups. All they needed was to dream in the wrong direction. History has no shortage of intelligent, well-educated individuals who, obsessed with their own passions, traded the fate of an entire nation to pursue them. These passions weren't always evil, but when misplaced or mistimed, the price was millions of lives, the isolation of a nation, and history's cold, unforgiving gaze. Two of the most prominent examples are Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, a monarch obsessed with magic, alchemy, omens, and monsters, and Ranavalona I of Madagascar, a queen who chose to preserve tradition by slaughtering hundreds of thousands and sealing her kingdom off from the world. Rudolph II, the emperor who lived in the shadows of alchemical dreams. As Holy Roman Emperor in the late 16th century, Rudolph II possessed everything a ruler might need: vast resources, the mighty Habsburg legacy, a flourishing intellectual scene, and the scientific renaissance sweeping across Europe. But instead of harnessing these advantages to strengthen his empire, he chose a different path, diving deep into the mystical. From Prague, he transformed his palace into a haven of alchemy, astrology, and the occult. He summoned alchemists like John Dee, clairvoyants, and dream interpreters, searching for the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone, or the key to the will of the cosmos. At a time when Europe was reeling from religious reform, spiritual conflict, and social upheaval, the emperor, who should have enacted rational policies, spent hours daily poring over celestial maps and distilling essence from cacti. When the royal court becomes a laboratory of delusion, Rudolf was not cruel, but his warped passions plunged the empire into chaos. Religious wars erupted in Bohemia, and he failed to act. His subjects demanded reform. He sent them astrological manuscripts. His generals warned of invasion. He was too busy deciphering a dream about a black swan. The result, the empire's finances collapsed, its faith fractured, and war spread across Central, setting the stage for the bloody 30 Years' War. History does not remember Rudolf as a tyrant, but as the emperor who forgot reality. And sometimes neglecting the real world can be more disastrous than tyranny itself. Ranavalona was when patriotism turns to terror. On the other side of the world, on the island of Madagascar, a different tragedy unfolded, this time at the hands of a woman, Ranavalona I, who reigned from 1828 to 1861. From the moment she took the throne, Ranavalona faced a terrifying reality. Madagascar was being eyed by Western powers, especially France and Britain. Fearing colonization, she made a bold decision. To preserve tradition, she would annihilate all foreign influence. It sounded like a patriotic strategy, but the way Ranavalona carried it out was soaked in blood and brutality, closing the country by blade and spear. She ordered the expulsion of all missionaries and foreigners. Western schools were shut down. The people were banned from learning Latin, banned from following Christianity, banned from using any language other than their native tongue. Those who disobeyed, tortured, killed, thrown off cliffs, or starved to death. She reinstated an ancient punishment called tangena, forcing the accused to drink poison, and if they survived, they were innocent. The result? Tens of thousands died each year simply because they failed a spiritual trial. Under Ranavalona's rule, about 20% of Madagascar's population was either killed or starved. In her eyes, it was a way to protect the soul of the nation. In the eyes of history, it was one of the worst isolationist and mass-killing policies of the 19th century. When passion becomes obsession, Ranavalona was not insane, but she was obsessed with the idea of preserving identity to the point where any change was seen as betrayal. In a world growing more global each day, she shut the gates. While the world entered the Industrial Revolution, she returned to superstition, ancient rituals, and collective punishment. If Rudolf was lost in fantasy, Ranavalona was fully aware, but chose to believe in her own nightmare. She didn't turn to alchemy, but she wielded faith like a sword, and the victims were always the common people. When rulers no longer see their people plummet. Though Rudolf and Ranavalona differed in method, one dreamy, one unyielding, they shared a core flaw. They placed their passion, fears, and inner worlds above the reality of the nation. And when rulers no longer see their people, only experiments, charms, or imagined enemies, that's when they turn their country into a victim of themselves. History, the indictment of distortion and devastates. No people choose a leader only to be dragged into darkness by delusion. No one wishes to be shut off from the world in the name of extreme patriotism. But when a ruler believes only what they want to see, instead of what is actually happening, every truth becomes an inconvenience to erase. Rudolf believed he was unlocking the gates to cosmic knowledge. Ranavalona believed she was saving the nation's soul. But history does not measure conviction by intention, it measures by consequence. And their consequences were poverty, death, division, and decline. Here is your requested English translation with no added filler or questions, exactly as you instructed. Passion is not wrong, but one must know when to stop. No one denies that passion is necessary. A leader with ideals is a good thing. But when those ideals cross the boundary of reality, when they become blind and built upon the suffering of others, then they are no longer ideals, but obsessions. And passion, no matter how noble, if misplaced, can still become a stain in history that cannot be washed away. Some crimes do not happen in secret, but are carried out before the lens of history, amid the applause of an entire civilization. In the 19th century, the West saw itself as the center of progress, industrialization, science, Enlightenment philosophy, declarations of human rights. But during that same period, in the place called the Dark Heart of Africa, A private state founded by King Leopold II of Belgium took the lives of over 10 million people, not in war, not in civil unrest, but in the name of civilization. While Rudolf II drowned himself in alchemy and Ranavalona defended tradition with blood, Leopold II committed something even colder: mass murder, not out of passion, not out of faith, but for profit. And what made his crime complete in horror was that it was shielded by a veil of morality. Congo Free State, a country, a massive labor camp. In 1885, after the Berlin Conference, where European powers divided the African cake, Leopold II received international recognition to rule a territory 70 times the size of Belgium in Central Africa. He named this land the Congo Free State, but in reality it was his private domain. Leopold needed no parliament, no state budget. He ran Congo like an extraction company, with resources being rubber, ivory, and the labor force being millions of black people forced to work under the barrel of a gun. Labor through blood, bone, and fear. The system Leopold established was a legalized killing machine. Those who failed to meet rubber quotas would have their hands cut off, sometimes their own, sometimes those of their wives, children, or neighbors, as a warning. The horrifying photos of parents holding their children's severed hands became irrefutable evidence. His private army, the Force Publique, made up of black mercenaries led by white officers, was trained to spread terror. They burned villages, took hostages, slaughtered families, all to ensure the rubber flowed to Europe without interruption. Rubber was the white gold of the industrial age, and every tire in Brussels bore a bloodstain from Congo. The name of civilization, the moral cloak of atrocity, Leopold did not hold the knife. He held the pen. He wrote passionate speeches about the white man's burden, about the mission to enlighten savage races, about education, healthcare, and progress. He even built a network of churches, hospitals, and schools to showcase before European journalists as proof of the humanitarian effort in Congo. He welcomed missionaries, Western reporters, showed them the bright side, while the dark side was buried in swamps, mines, and nameless mass graves. The crime exposed, but too late. It was not until the early 20th century when journalists and witnesses like George Washington Williams, Roger Casement, and E.D. Morel persistently gathered evidence that the crimes began to surface. Detailed reports, eyewitness accounts, and photographs of victims were sent to major newspapers, sparking outrage across Europe. Public opinion rose up. International pressure forced Leopold to hand over Congo to the Belgian government in 1908, but by then, an estimated 10 to 15 million people had died from forced labor, starvation, disease, and torture. And the cruelest irony, he was never prosecuted, never convicted, not a single day in prison. Even when he died in 1909, his funeral was still held as that of a respected king. When colonialism becomes a tool to legitimize plunder, Leopold II was not the only case, but he is the clearest example of how the West used the ideal of civilization to mask exploitation. Railways were not built to serve locals, but to transport minerals. Schools were not open to enlighten, but to instill submission. They brought the cross, but alongside the gun. The history of colonialism is a history of deception, that white men came to educate people of color, but in reality they came to drain resources, divide communities, and impose culture through violence. Not silence, but selective memory. The most terrifying thing is not just the crimes, but how they were forgotten. Throughout the 20th century, Congo was not mentioned in European history lessons. Museums in Belgium still displayed Leopold as a patron of the arts and culture. His statue stands in the center of Brussels with no inscription about Congo. While millions of the dead have no gravestones, the killer is remembered in bronze. History is not only written in blood, it is also written in compassion. When we speak of rulers in history, we often recall the cruel: Caligula, Ivan the Terrible, Ranavalona, or Leopold II, those who used fear as a tool and blood as ink to write their empires. But that is not the whole story. In those same pages of history, beside the tyrants, there is also space for others, not because they were weak, but because they chose the harder path: to rule with wisdom, with justice, with empathy. Alexander the Great, King Solomon, Marcus Aurelius, 3 names, 3 eras, 3 civilizations, but one thing in common: they did not let power eclipse character. They did not use the throne as chains, but as a torch to light the way. Alexander the Great, the conqueror who brought respect. As one of the greatest military leaders of all time, Alexander was known not only for conquering the Persian Empire, but also for how he treated the defeated. Unlike those who ruled by fear, Alexander did not burn the cities he captured. He preserved temples, maintained local religions, and even married the enemy's princess. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to connect. In Egypt, he was hailed as pharaoh by the people out of respect for their native culture. In Persia, he wore local attire, learned the local language, and appointed Persians to his administrative ranks. That was not weakness, it was vision. For Alexander, to rule was not to impose, but to unify. And that's why he left behind not just a vast map, but a generation of cities bearing his name, Alexandria, where East and West converged in culture. King Solomon, wisdom as a sword without blood. In the Old Testament, Solomon, the third king of Israel, was granted by God a gift not every ruler possessed, wisdom. And he used that gift not to build the mightiest army, but a lasting system of justice. His most famous story is when two women both claimed the same child. With no proof and no one willing to yield, Solomon didn't threaten. He calmly ordered the child to be cut in two. When one woman cried out, begging to give the baby to the other, Solomon knew she was the real mother. Solomon was no warrior, yet Jews, Christians, and Muslims revere him as one of the wisest kings in history. Under his reign, the nation prospered, trade flourished, and the Temple of Jerusalem was built, not as a monument to conquest, but to sacredness. Marcus Aurelius, the last emperor of ideals among Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius is one of the rare few who left behind not only laws and monuments, but thoughts. His book, Meditations, is still read today as a moral compass for ethical leadership. A Stoic philosopher, he didn't see the throne as an honor, but as a duty. He wrote, "You are an emperor, but first you are a man, and as a man, no one escapes suffering." During years of invasion and plague, he did not flee. He stayed beside his soldiers, shared their danger, and buried the dead. He held no banquets when his people were starving. He didn't kill dissenters. He ruled with stillness and left behind an orderly Rome amid chaos. The contrast lies not in power, but in how it's used. Alexander, Solomon, and Marcus all had absolute power. They could have ordered executions without cause, plundered, burned, and conquered like so many others, but they didn't. The question isn't, what could they have done? It's, what did they choose to do? While rulers like Caligula, Ivan, and Leopold II chose fear as their tool of control, these three chose trust. Where others built thrones with blood, they built theirs with wisdom. And that's why their legacy lives not just in geography, but in the human heart. Ruling with wisdom is not weakness, it is purposeful strength. Strength does not lie in who can kill the most. It lies in who can restrain themselves when they have the right to kill. A tyrant needs no reason. Fear will always be their weapon. But a true leader must have a reason for every act, and that reason must come from the good of the people, not from their own desires. Alexander chose mercy. Solomon chose judgment. Marcus chose ideals. They were not perfect, but they proved history does not need to be soaked in blood to be remembered. It can be a symphony of compassion, of reason, of dreams realized not through whips, but through logic and justice. Whether king, emperor, or pope, all must eventually face themselves. History is not a one-note heroic anthem. It is a harmony of glory and downfall, of ideals and fear, of light and shadow. Throughout this series, we have walked through palaces stained with blood, thrones shaken by abuse of power, dynasties steeped in delusion, and empires built on lies. We have seen Caligula from genius to madness, Ivan from father to filicide, Ranavalona from a defender of identity to a phantom of terror, Leopold II slaughtering millions under the banner of civilization. And in contrast, we have met Alexander, Solomon, Marcus Aurelius, those who chose wisdom and humanity as their tools of rule. But in the end, there is one inescapable truth: consequences. No throne can cover the conscience, no crown can erase memory. When the lights fade, the ruler is left alone in the final room of their life. No soldiers, no applause, no wine, no mistresses, no flatterers, only one person and the truth. Only memory and the price it demands. Caligula was stabbed by his own guards. John the South died in bed with his lover, beaten to death by her husband. Ivan wept over the body of his son. then spent his last years as a ghost haunting his palace. Leopold II died to the jeers of his people, his corpse pelted with dung as it passed through the streets of Belgium. No one takes power to the grave, but everyone takes the consequences of what they once chose. Compassion may not build a dynasty, but it builds a legacy. Alexander died young, but was remembered across 3 continents. Solomon left behind a legacy of wisdom that transcends time. Marcus Aurelius did not leave the wealthiest empire, but he left a book that helps millions live peacefully in a chaotic world. People do not cry for their power. They cry for their wisdom, for their compassion, because they understand to rule is not to possess, but to give. And that makes all the difference. A tyrant may be feared, but a wise ruler is remembered. Power is temporary. Consequences are eternal. John of England, forced to sign the Magna Carta, was never beloved, no matter how many castles he built. Rana Valona kept her country free from foreign invasion, but left a wound that still lingers in Madagascar's memory. Rudolf II once nurtured art and science, yet also through his negligence pushed Europe into war. By contrast, figures like Marcus Aurelius, despite facing war, plague, and rebellion, are still remembered with respect. Not because they were perfect, but because they never forgot. Behind the throne is a human being. Behind every decision, millions of lives. What remains in human memory is not power, but how that power was used. History has proven it is easy to kill a man, to rule with integrity, that is hard, and to hold on to compassion while wielding absolute power, that is the greatest challenge any ruler will face. Caligula believed he was a god. John XII believed the church was his personal brothel. Ivan believed everyone was a traitor, even his own son. Rana Valona believed anyone with new ideas was an enemy. Leopold II believed cruelty was necessary for progress. But Alexander, Solomon, Marcus Aurelius, they believed greatness comes from listening, from forgiveness, from restraint in the face of temptation. Death does not end everything. It only begins the judgment. In life, Leopold II masked his crimes with churches and schools. But in death, the banned photographs, the buried testimonies all resurfaced. In life, Ivan ruled through blood. But the tears he shed after killing his son forced history to ask, did power save him or destroy him? And in life, Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his journal, live each day as if it were your last. But do not fear the last day, for it will come as a friend if you have not betrayed yourself. That line wasn't read at a coronation. It was echoed instead in thousands of speeches on ethical leadership around the world. The final lesson. Humans are remembered, not for how long they ruled, but for how they lived when given the right to rule. Looking back on this entire series, one truth repeats. Power spares no one. It only magnifies everything, the good and the evil. Those who carry humanity within, power turns them into light. Those who carry fear, obsession, and blind ambition, power turns them into darkness. And in the end, only one thing survives: consequence. And from that consequence, what humanity learns. A nation can forgive, but memory does not forget. A dynasty can fall, but truth lives on. In paintings, in books, in the sighs of nameless souls. History never sleeps. In the darkness of ancient libraries, beneath the faded dust of parchment, there are always whispers of power, of madness, of those who once stood on the highest peaks, only to fall into the abyss they themselves had carved. Some kings are born with laurels on their brows, welcomed as the destiny of their people, but they become the nightmare their empires must endure. Power does not create a person, it merely reveals the true nature. Caligula, once affectionately called Little Boots by Roman soldiers, ascended to the throne like the morning sun, but that sun quickly turned into a scorching fire. He executed people out of boredom, deified his dead sister, and turned the Roman Empire into a stage for depraved cruelty. A warning: power, if left unchecked, will devour the soul of its bearer. When religion is no longer light, but a tool for lust, John XII, appointed pope at the age of 18, left behind no sacred decrees, only orgies, drunken feasts, and violence in what was once called the house of God. He died as he lived, in the darkness of sin, with no prayer to see him off. The soul of a nation cannot be led by someone who does not respect their own soul. Blood on the throne is never washed clean. Ivan the Terrible, an orphan of power who grew up in silence and fear, turned his past into a sword against his people. When he killed his own son in a fit of rage, it wasn't just a life lost, it was the collapse of Russia's future. An empire built on fear cannot last long, and a ruler with an iron fist will eventually be crushed by his own grip. The madness of intelligence without guidance. Rudolf II, the Habsburg emperor, was obsessed with alchemy, magic, and beauty. He gathered astrologers, sorcerers, and scientists in Prague. But while he dreamed of the mystical, his empire decayed. Intelligence is a gift, but without wisdom to guide it, it's merely a spotlight over an abyss. Love for the homeland cannot justify bloodshed. Rana Valona, Queen of Madagascar, was hailed as the wall that defends the land for her fierce resistance to invaders. But she is also remembered as a tyrant responsible for thousands of deaths through rituals, forced labor, and brutal isolation. Loyalty to one's homeland does not grant the right to turn its people into victims. When crimes against humanity wear a crown, Leopold II, King of Belgium, took millions of lives in the Congo under the guise of civilization. Hands were severed, children enslaved, women tortured, all in exchange for rubber and wealth. Mass atrocities always begin with silence towards small wrongs. A king may kill with a decree, but humanity kills with indifference. Not all who reign are darkness. This video is not only about the wicked, it also honors the candles in the night. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor who wrote Meditations in the Echoes of War. Solomon, who asked for wisdom instead of gold or silver. Alexander the Great, who conquered with brilliance and became legend. Charlemagne, who built an empire through law and structure. Elizabeth I, the woman who dared to declare, "I have the heart of a king." History also remembers those who used power as a tool to serve, not to destroy. And the final lesson is, not everyone who wears a crown is truly a king, and not everyone who holds power deserves to lead, because in the end, time strips away every title, leaving only the essence. When the last candle burns out, what remains is not the throne, but the memory left behind. Sleep well, dreamer of history. Let these lessons guard your rest so you never forget, only wisdom, compassion, and self-awareness are true power. And so, behind every crown lies a heartbeat, sometimes wounded, sometimes yearning, always human. Power may command armies, but it cannot command love. It may silence nations, but it cannot silence the ache of being unseen. Have you found something meaningful in this journey through the shadows of power and betrayal? Did these stories echo something within you? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And before you go, don't forget to send a few kind goodnight wishes to those watching alongside you.